Welcome to the Boxing Gossip channel. Please hit subscribe if you are new. Post-fight reaction video to Carl Frampton versus Nonito Donaire. The fight has ended. The scorecards have been read out. All three judges scored a fight to Carl Frampton 117 to 111 in favour of Carl over Nonito Donaire. I think very, very fair result there, 9 rounds to 3. A fairly accurate reflection of how this fight panned out, in my opinion. Made a few notes that I'm going to refer to throughout the course of the video. I thought Frampton looked absolutely class in the first 3 or 4 rounds of this fight. Not dissimilar to the Horatio Garcia fight, where he came out, looked, world class for the first couple of rounds. In that fight, he faded a lot worse than he did in this fight. He was a lot more on it throughout the course of the fight today. There were 1 or 2 moments in the middle to late rounds, which we'll come on to in the second half of this video perhaps, but overall, thought Frampton looked very, very, very good and looked pretty good early on in the fight. I thought his judgment of distance was fantastic early on. Nonito Donaire just couldn't really judge his range, judge his distance against Carl Frampton. The amount of times Donaire was inaccurate, the amount of times Nonito Donaire was throwing punches, but they were just falling short, and he couldn't quite catch Carl Frampton clean in the early rounds. Frampton's footwork was really on point, very small, subtle changes on the back foot, little steps back, little pivots, little step back, just keeping himself out of range of Nonito Donaire, frustrating Donaire, combined with then sort of lateral movement using the width of the ring, combined with that back foot game. Real impressive stuff from Frampton early on. He swept the early rounds of the fight on my card for sure. Offensively, Frampton fighting in bursts, throwing very eye-catching combinations of punches, good shot selection, sometimes unorthodox punches, sometimes doing that thing where he leads with the backhand, then throws the front hand after the backhand. But eye-catching shots, fast, snappy, good work, marking up Nonito Donaire early on. Donaire, I had to say, I did speculate in the lead up to this fight, he may not have too much left. For me, slightly out of ideas in the early rounds. He came onto it a bit in the second half of the fight, but that was kind of as Frampton started to tire, and maybe as Carl made a few more mistakes as he began to tire. But Donaire, for me, frustrated by the Frampton movement, frustrated by the Frampton speed and athleticism, and a bit lacking in ideas in that first half of the fight. Being a bit too inaccurate, a bit too one-dimensional compared to what Carl Frampton was offering. At the end of 3, whilst I had Carl on good form, I was concerned about Frampton gassing, basically because of the Garcia fight previously. He was looking just as good in that fight, and then the gas tank appeared to rapidly empty. Looking at Frampton and the way he was fighting, there was lots of movement, there was lots of explosiveness, there was lots of being up on his toes, and I did worry that kind of style could make him gas. Frampton is now 31, and the kind of style that he fights is possibly a young man's style. There's a lot of emphasis on reactions, on speed, on movement, on explosiveness, and in the lighter weight classes, fighters tend to hit their peaks at an early stage when there's that sort of premium on speed and agility. So, at 31 years old, fighting that style, I was concerned after 3 that as good as he looked, Frampton would gas. Fortunately, whilst he did tire, it's a 12-round fight, of course he's going to tire, he certainly didn't gas to the same extent as the Horatio Garcia fight. Clearly he trained very hard for it, and he looked in much better shape in terms of, avoiding that gas tank emptying, and credit goes to him for that, because, that was a real concern. By rounds 11 and 12, he was pretty tired, and Donaire was having more success. But then again, it was a 12-round fight that he was well up in at that point, so you can't really begrudge him for feeling the pace off to some of the work that he'd done. Round 4, Frampton's having more success, takes the fight to the inside. Quite impressive inside work as well. You know, the first 3 rounds he was boxing nicely from range, boxing nicely from the back foot on the outside, mixes it up a bit on round 4, and in round 5, you know, he's getting low, he's bobbing and weaving up close, making Donaire miss on the inside, and then countering with fast shots that he's picking nicely. Really impressive stuff, you know, good versatility from Frampton. Rounds 5, 6 and 7, whilst they're largely Frampton rounds, Donaire does start to come into the fight, and maybe Frampton has lost 1% of pace, you know, after the first 4 rounds. But you start to see Donaire landing noteworthy shots from the 5th round onwards. From round 5, he's sort of countering quite nicely with his back to the ropes, doing good work from the back of the ropes. And as Frampton's coming forward, he's kind of just leaning back against the ropes and throwing a tasty uppercut in the middle. He catches Frampton heavily in the 5th round, and there's a few moments where Frampton has to grit his teeth and keep going. But he does that well, and he shows a good chin and good durability throughout the course of this fight. You know, after a few tricky moments, 5, 6, 7, Frampton gets his second wind, and for me, 8, 9, 10 is more, you know, comfort zone for Frampton. Again, 1 or 2 tricky moments, but on the whole, he's ahead. Rounds 11 and 12, Frampton does notably start to tire, and Donaire stays on strong and probably does take those 2 rounds. Round 11 in particular, Donaire lands a very, very big punch, some sort of hook on Frampton. You could see that Frampton was temporarily wobbled, but again, credit to Carl Frampton's fitness. He took the punch well, recovered from it, and made sure it wasn't a huge turning point in the course of the fight, which was the most important thing. My thoughts on watching this fight is that Frampton has improved substantially in terms of this performance from the Horatio Garcia fight. I know a comment like this is always going to get me stick. I do think Nonito Donaire was a far less formidable opponent than was being made out today. You know, there was a lot of talk about how he was a definite Hall of Famer, a lot of talk about how he might be the best fighter ever to have been brought over to Ireland. You know, all of this stuff, maybe it's true, maybe it's not true, but yeah, Nonito Donaire, 35-year-old guy who, for me, has been fighting well below his best for many years now. Not just 1 year, but he has been below his best for several years. And I don't believe he's at his best in that weight class either. I appreciate that in many ways he looked a scopier, rangier individual than Frampton, but sometimes I believe his style was to impose himself on guys in smaller weight classes, and he's just never going to have the same success at featherweight that he enjoyed at the lower weight classes. And for me, Nonito Donaire, you know, he's a long way from his peak. Not surprising given his age, not surprising given he's had some tough fights over the years. And there were moments he was really out of ideas. So despite the fact that Frampton deserves real credit for beating him, and despite the fact that Frampton showed real improvements from the Horatio Garcia fight, I still have concerns about Carl Frampton at the very, very top level of the sport. And, you know, when we talk about the top level of the sport, I include Lee Selby in that equation. And there was lots of talk on Box Nation tonight that should Selby prove victorious against Josh Warrington, which I personally expect him to, Selby may travel to Northern Ireland to fight Carl Frampton in a big money fight. Let me say at this stage, both of them are 31. That's potentially in the territory of being considered in the autumn of your career for a featherweight. Not in the winter of your career, but in the autumn of your career. My belief is that Selby has the style to cause Frampton problems. And even at 31, Selby kind of has the style that will potentially age better than Frampton's style. You know, Frampton, lots of movement, lots of explosiveness, lots of speed, lots of agility. You know, Selby has all those things as well. But for me, Selby is probably more technical than explosive, and that's a style that can potentially age better as you get into your mid-30s. I've always thought that sort of elusive style that Selby possesses and that range that Selby possesses could cause real problems for Frampton. And yeah, if that fight is to be made, I think it's unlikely that my opinion will change on the problems that Selby could cause Frampton. But Carl gets real credit tonight. He boxed nicely. His timing was on point. His shot selection was really, really good. His movement, his footwork, his back foot game was 10 out of 10 in those early rounds. Real good bit of versatility. And whilst Nonito Donaire is for me quite a long way from his best, and I'm going to stand by that opinion, Carl Frampton's beaten a good fighter in there tonight, and he's beaten him with quite a bit in hand. He's had to answer some questions. He's had to battle through some tough moments. And certainly in the first half of the fight, he's shown that he still has attributes at an elite world-class level. I do have a concern that Carl Frampton may be slightly flattered by this performance based on what Nonito Donaire does have left. And I also do have a concern that whilst Carl Frampton didn't gas in this fight like he did in the Garcia fight, I do have a concern that he is a far less threatening fighter at this stage of his career in the second half of the fight, as opposed to in the first half of the fight. And I think if he's fighting at the very, very top level, that could maybe be exposed, and he could maybe be vulnerable either to being hurt late on or to a fighter coming on strong and sweeping the late rounds against him. We'll have to see. But right now, Carl Frampton is still at the top of the sport. He's still got world-class attributes. He's still performing at a very, very high level. And, in the Garcia fight for the first 3 or 4 rounds, and in this fight for the first 4 rounds or so, some of the things he's doing in there are an absolute joy to watch. Real high-class stuff. Let me know your thoughts, guys. Give me your take on the scoring. Give me your take on Donaire's performance. Give me your take on the pros and cons of Frampton's performance. Is Frampton flattered by the state of Donaire at this stage of his career? Or did Carl Frampton still beat what you consider to be a world-class opponent? Let me know your thoughts. Leave your comments in the section below. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the thumbs up. Please press subscribe. As always, many thanks for tuning in.